So, you know, we just want a contrast in motion here. And so it's going to be a lot of things to take in all at once, which is cool because when we get our layers of dust built in, all that motion is just going to give the viewer a bit of a sense of excitement and like they've just been shoved into this world and a lot of things are happening, and then we slow it down and it just kind of feels good. Okay, so from here we'll get out of the graph editor, and I just want to start placing these dirt elements. So I'm going to split my view here. I want a top view and I want my active camera. And what I'm going to do is add an effect to this layer before I start duplicating it. And I want Gaussian blur. Okay. So I'm going to leave it at 0, but because we're not going to be using depth of field from the camera, this is going to allow us to fake the depth of field, and every duplicate layer will have its own level of Gaussian blur. So that's why I apply it before I start duplicating the layer. And at this point, I'm going to do Command D, and I'm just hovering in the top view, my cursor over that widget until I get the letter Z in the corner of the cursor. So at this point, I can drag it forward and we can see how that's separating in our active camera, but it's really crucial to make sure that you watch how it's moving. Okay. That's good. There's a good amount of separation between these two layers. I like the motion. We just have to break up the repetitive nature, and some quick ways we can do that is by either rotating or going to the scale and offering negative values. So I'm going to start with negative 100 on the x-axis. Okay, so that flips it around. Now it doesn't feel identical. I might even move it a little bit. So that's good. One thing we could do, well, we'll worry about that later. So what I might want to do is scale this down a little bit, because now that it's so close to the camera, we're losing some of our resolution in our image because it's effectively scaled up because it's so close. So as you duplicate these layers and bring them closer to the camera in the top view, you need to make sure that you're scaling these down as much as you need to keep the images sharp. So I'll go ahead and duplicate this again, bring it closer, and you can see the bounding box in the active camera. It's going to be really large, really large. So I just grab it and hold shift, and I can just scale right in the viewport, which is cool. I can find another little patch of pixels that I haven't seen before. I can rotate this. So I'll hit the W key for the rotate tool and then just hover over the Z axis and then just hold shift, and you can rotate by increments of 45 degrees. And I'm starting to see some patterns that aren't good. So it might be time to retire this image. Not sure yet. One thing, so if I wanted to use the edge of this image like this, and you can see that we have a harsh cutoff here, that's no good. What I could do is use that motion tile effect, and that will take the borders of this layer and just repeat them. So let me grab this layer, put motion tile on, and I'll extend the output width, and I'll turn on mirror edges. So what that does is it takes the image and then it repeats it but inverts it right along its border. So if I turn that off, and you can see we still have that seam, and that's with mirror edges on. So now I have a lot more options. I can use this this layer many different ways. So that's cool. Yeah. So what I want to do now is just play this back, see how it's looking. Actually, I don't like that there are patterns all over. So I'm going to move this down and put motion tile on this layer also. Increase the output height, mirror, and that's cool. I'm good with that. Oh, uh-oh. Got to make sure that we're clearing our camera. All right. And scale this up. Okay. And scale this up. All right. Okay. It's not bad. It's cool. I mean, it could use more depth, but I think that's fine. So what I'm going to do is duplicate it one more time. And this time, I'm going to actually blur the layer. Although, looks like we're actually getting some blurring. No, that must be actually shot that way. But it doesn't look bad. At any rate, what you would do is I'm going to scale this down a little bit. And take my Gaussian blur, blur it out. So if I just solo this layer, you can see what we're doing. And this is just to help fake some depth in the shot. And this is a great way to introduce a little bit of color as well to an otherwise monochromatic composition. So what I'll do is add a hue and saturation and colorize it and add color. Now it's overwhelming, so to throttle that back, I might also apply a levels adjustment. And if I just crush the values that we're working with, that will taper some of this off. And I might want to blur it more and desaturate it. Maybe move it until you find something that you really like. Well, whatever. And then maybe duplicate that and give it some color that works well with the red. Yeah, like a red and blue. Maybe turn the opacity down, just so you have like some kind of interesting color combination in there. Another thing you might want to do is switch these guys to add blending mode instead. And that way the colors multiply on top of each other, or add actually on top of each other. And I'll just turn these down. Okay, so I mean, that's actually pretty distracting. I'm gonna crank this blur. All right. Yeah, it's not looking so good. But whatever. You know, just an idea. Okay. So we have some depth here, which is cool. And we have some blurring going on. Also cool. And we might play with the blurring a little bit later of these dust layers, but for now, let's introduce that compound blur that we looked at in class. So I'm going to apply it to an adjustment layer and grab my compound blur. We'll just shut that off for now. And I want to go grab a new smudge layer, fingerprints. Okay. Now, before we tackle this, so we've got all these layers here for our dust and even for our little, color smudges. So what we want to do is clean up some of this mess that we've created already. So I'm going to get these screen layers and I will pre-compose them. So Control Shift, or rather Command Shift C, and I'll call this dust. Okay. So what we want is, because we moved all attributes when we pre-composed, you can see that we still have the 3D switches applied, which is great. So now we can just turn on, and just to show you, okay, we have no 3D, but as soon as I turn on the collapse transformation, we're now looking inside of this comp and seeing that these layers are 3D. And what's also cool is that our blending modes are still being honored in our main comp, okay? We still see that we have screen applied to all of our individual layers. Okay. So that's great. This gives us a lot of flexibility. If we wanted to place an effect on all of our dust layers, well, we can do that now to our master comp. Let's say that we wanted to tweak the levels here. We'll put a levels effect on that. And we can now do that, but we've actually disturbed the way this is composited. So now we can apply a blending mode to the entire layer, and that's cool. But if we had more nuanced blending modes inside of the layers that we pre-composed, they would all acquire this screen blending mode. So, if you want to just keep things simple, then don't bother applying an effect to the main layer, and instead you could go in to this layer and create yourself an adjustment layer and apply levels to that. Okay. So that'll keep the things even simpler in our main comp. You know, we still have all of the control over each individual layer's blending mode. So anyway, at this point, I want to save my project, and I want to, let's see, I want to turn down the opacity of my dust comp just a little bit. It's a little harsh. And maybe I'll add a solid in the background. Right now we're just compositing on transparency here. So I could just throw a solid on here. That's one way of creating transparency. But another way I could do that is to actually jump into my render comp, and you can see that we have that. If we zoom in, we still have some transparency here because we don't have an object in the background. So one thing we could do in our main comp, in our render comp, is to apply a solid composite effect. And that's cool. Solid composite will take any color you want and place it as a sort of like placing a solid in the background of this comp. But instead of actually having to use a layer, we can just use this effect. Just kind of keep it clean. Keep this this comp pretty lean, which is good. So cool. So what I want to do now is apply our, or rather line our fingerprint layer up. So I'm going to make it 3D, and I want to pull this forward a little bit. So I'm going to come into my top comp and just pull it forward. I'll pull it forward quite a bit, and we'll pull it down a little bit. And now what I'm going to do is turn on our adjustment layer and point the compound blur to our fingerprint comp. And I'm going to say effects and mask and just shut off the fingerprint comp. Now you can see we're getting that compound blur effect, which is cool. I'll just exaggerate it. Okay, we want to turn this stretch map to fit because it's trying to stretch our image to fit the entire composition. We don't want that. So now we're getting those nice blurring with those. You can almost see the thumbprints in the image, and that's really cool. So let's just scrub this. You can see that it's hard to see, but nothing's happening. Okay. You can see our layer isn't moving in the 3D space, and the reason for that is because we have to, we need this layer, our fingerprint layer, to be pre-composed, okay? Because the effect cannot see that this layer is 3D because they exist in the same composition. So I'm going to pre-compose this. I'm going to move my attributes, and I'll call it, fingerprint. And I need to activate the collapse transformation switch, okay? So it's now moving with our comp, right? That's cool. Now it's in the position that I set a moment ago, but if I wanted to move it around in the main composition, I could just activate the 3D switch and turn the visibility on just so I can see it and move it. And you can see that my layer is actually over here because it's pre-composed. But I could move that forward if I wanted to. And then just remember to shut the visibility off. And now it's going to parallax differently in our shot. That's perfect. Nice. Okay. I'm actually going to move it back to where it was, just so that it's a little bit sharper. I'll save my work. And just going to pause the recording for a moment. I'll be right back.